Hello, everyone. My name is Ryan Thomas, and welcome to the Thomas Take Sports Podcast live on Grandstand Sports Network, as well as Facebook at the Thomas Take Sports Podcast, as well as Twitter at Thomas Takeover. Follow me. As well as the YouTube channel, the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. Thank you all for tuning in. I am back once again for another part of the Thomas Take Sports Podcast show. Today is February 21st, 2018. This year is going by fast. And we are moving on and onward and upward in terms of the world of MMA. We had two great fights, this past weekend. Actually, three great fights. One of which was in Bellator, Matt Mitrione versus Roy Nelson. Matt Mitrione, fantastic performance. Very excited to see who he faces in the next half of the Bellator bracket, as well as Chael Sonnen. Chael Sonnen and Matt Mitrione, the only two fighters to advance thus far. Chael will fight the winner of Fedor versus Quentin Rampage Jackson. Matt Mitrione will fight the winner of Ryan Bader and King Mo Lawal. Very, very in tune, with that news in terms of the Bellator World Heavyweight Grand Prix. Also, this past Sunday, Donald Cowboy Cerrone versus Yancy Medeiros. I really believe Donald Cerrone would win. My reason for that, he wins the fights that he's supposed to. He loses the big fights. That's always been the writing on the wall, so to speak, for Donald Cerrone. He was a winner of 8 straight fights, got a title shot in the UFC lightweight division, and squandered it in 64 seconds. He lost 3 straight fights heading into this fight with Yancy Medeiros, and he dispatched him in the first round. So that's just the type of fighter that Donald Cerrone is, he even knows it, So it's not hate by me. I'm a huge Cowboy Cerrone fan, always have been. Followed him dating back to the Tap Out days. It was a show on Versus where guys like Mask, rest in peace to him, Skyscrape, and Face toured the country and looked for MMA talent, and one of the guys that they discovered was Cowboy Cerrone. So, without that show, who knows what would have happened to Donald Cowboy Cerrone in terms of his MMA career. Would he have been discovered at a later date? Would he have been discovered at all? There's a lot of what if there, a lot of speculation and good debate story there. And for him, this was his 37th fight, I believe, in combined with the WEC and the UFC, more fights than anyone in MMA history in between those two MMA organizations. With this win, he tied Yancy Medeiros for 20 wins inside the UFC octagon, tied with Michael Bisping and George St. Pierre, of course. So the better question is, what intrigued me most about the fight? In terms of the Cowboy Cerrone Medeiros fight, what I really liked was the sportsmanship, but I did think that it was a little bit too much. I thought, on the other hand of Yancy Medeiros, I thought he might have paid a little bit too much respect to Donald Cerrone. I thought, Yancy's head wasn't really in the game in the fight. There was a lot of joking around, a lot of patting each other on the back, high-fiving after punches. Sometimes I like that, and in this situation, in terms of Yancy's career, Cerrone, as I mentioned, was a loser of 3 straight fights. Medeiros was a winner of 3 straight fights. This was a huge fight for him. Had he been able to get past Donald Cerrone, probably would have been in line for a top 5 contender in the UFC welterweight division. But now that he loses to Cerrone, it's a big name on his resume that was a loss. It's kind of the back of the line for him. So that stinks for Yancy Medeiros, but I did believe that Yancy was a true warrior in terms of how he acted in the fight afterwards, running over to Donald Cerrone's grandmother, who is well known to have had a battle with cancer for the past few years. And Yancy was a true sportsman in that regard. That was one of the best moments, I think, in my time as an MMA fan, to see that willingness of sportsmanship was truly fascinating on the part of Yancy Medeiros. And the fight was exciting. What intrigued me more than the fight, was the call-out of Khabib Nurmagomedov from the mouth or lips or voice of Donald Cerrone. That was what intrigued me the most. The call-out of Khabib Nurmagomedov. Nobody Nobody in the history of the UFC has willingly called out Khabib Nurmagomedov. Not even Tony Ferguson, not even Conor McGregor, not even any of the big names in the UFC along the years. No one has willingly said, Khabib, I'm coming for you. Tony Ferguson was signed to fight him due to the fact that they're two of the top contenders. That fight fell out due to Khabib's weight-cutting issue. Now they are scheduled to fight in April. But Tony Ferguson never essentially called out Khabib. They were just signed to fight once, twice, three times. You know who else was signed to fight Khabib Nurmagomedov was Donald Cerrone, and Khabib had to pull out of that fight as well. So this is a truly interesting time in the UFC lightweight division. Donald Cerrone was coming off 3 straight losses, beats Yancy Medeiros. I did believe that Cerrone did beat Robbie Lawler. Obviously, he was destroyed by Darren Till in the welterweight division, but Darren Till is a massive welterweight, as is the possible next few opponents for Donald Cerrone if he were to stay at welterweight. So I think you should move down from welterweight to lightweight and put himself in that puzzle, put himself in the mix of Khabib, of Tony, of Conor. I like that. I like that a lot. So that was what intrigued me the most about the fight. I think that what is intriguing about this as well is that essentially Cowboy believes that Khabib is going to be able to dispatch Tony Ferguson. He didn't call out the winner of Ferguson versus Khabib. He called out Khabib specifically. He knew that Khabib was signed to fight Tony. He must truly believe that Khabib will beat Tony. That is just my humble opinion. There's definite need for some sort of parity in this division. This division has been stagnant. This division has been terrible for the better part of the last 2 years, in large part due to the fact that Conor McGregor is completely unwilling to defend his UFC title. I don't want to hear anything about contract negotiations or money fights or any of that bullcrap. Conor McGregor has had plenty of quote-unquote money fights. He fought the ultimate money fight this past August, fighting Floyd Mayweather. He said after that fight that it was back to business in the UFC for him. He didn't say he was going to take more than a year off, which is what it looks like he's going to do from the fight game post his bout with Floyd Mayweather. I know that the UFC has been hard at working at a contract extension or negotiating a new contract for Conor. I honestly think that this is all Conor. This is all Conor. The only reason why Conor is not fighting is because of Conor. It's not because of Dana White. It's not because of the Fertittas. It's not because he doesn't have an opponent. He clearly has plenty of opponents willing to fight him. That's not a problem. He has plenty of opponents willing to fight him in the division that he is the quote-unquote champion of. Donald Cerrone, also one of those guys, now that Cerrone is saying that he wants to move down to 155, fight the winner, who he believes is going to be Khabib, and then, cinch himself up for that money fight. The McGregor-Cerrone fight could have become a reality had Cerrone defeated Rafael Dos Anjos, prior to Dos Anjos losing his title to Eddie Alvarez. If you guys don't remember, I can, refresh your memory. Rafael Dos Anjos was slated to fight Conor McGregor. Rafael Dos Anjos would not have been slated to fight McGregor had Cerrone beat Dos Anjos prior to that. So had Cerrone beat Dos Anjos, it would have been Cerrone versus McGregor. The Nate Diaz fights probably would have never had existed. So that's also a little bit of what if trivia there in terms of the UFC. What happened was Dos Anjos beat Cerrone. Dos Anjos beat Cerrone. Slated to fight Conor. Dos Anjos hurt his foot. Conor then fights Nate Diaz, loses, fights Nate Diaz again, wins in a unanimous decision. And along the way, Eddie Alvarez fought Rafael Dos Anjos. When Dos Anjos came back from his foot injury, Eddie Alvarez knocks out Rafael Dos Anjos, and then we have the Alvarez-McGregor fight. We all know what happens there. McGregor knocks out Eddie Alvarez in November of 2016, and here we are in February of 2018, won Floyd Mayweather-Conor McGregor super fight later, and Conor still has not defended his lightweight title. I really think that this needs to get moving. That, we have other fighters electing to move down, electing to get in the mix, Donald Cerrone being one of them. Now that you have Cerrone in the mix, who's one of the best MMA fighters of all time, with or without a title, Uriah Faber is in that discussion as well. Things need to start moving now. Let's really get some discussion going about whether or not Conor should have that title. Let's really get it going. I have heard so many things from so many sources, from so many people inside the world of MMA that are saying that Conor will come back in September, fight the winner of Ferguson versus Khabib, and, then go from there. Realistically, this guy with a belt around his waist is bad for the UFC. People say it's good for the UFC. He allows them to make money. He's not fighting. So how is he making them money? It doesn't really... The only way Conor makes the UFC real money is if he's fighting in the UFC or fighting, period. That is the only way he's making them money. It's bad for the sport to have a champion that is not willing to defend his title. It's bad for the sport when you have other challengers, ones that are coming off of wins in other weight classes, willing to drop down, and that champion is nowhere to be found. So Donald Cerrone is throwing his name into the mix, putting his name in his cowboy hat, and saying, I'm ready to go. I am more than ready to go down to 155, fight Khabib, who I too believe will beat Tony Ferguson in April, and make this fight happen. Just make the fights happen. Conor, where are you? Where are you at? I don't understand it, but I definitely think that Cerrone deserves a lot of credit for the career that he has had. I mean, he's fought virtually everyone. Sometimes he's come up short. He's definitely come up short in title bids. And it's very unfortunate. I would like to see him get a belt around his waist. That's a guy that would defend his title probably the next day, whereas Conor McGregor is begging for money fights, begging for this, begging for that, when he's already been given more than enough. So that's the stark contrast between McGregor and Cerrone. Guys like that, two completely different people. Kind of went a little bit off the train with that, just a little bit, but I had some thoughts on it that, how Cerrone's call out of Khabib can completely change this division. So, great show this Wednesday. Great show today. I really enjoyed it. Back on the mic for the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. Donald Cerrone won. I told you he would. I told you he would win, and he's inserting his name in the mix at 155 pounds. I'm Ryan Thomas. Take care, everybody.